So the question is, how do radio stations take the lead in becoming future-proof? We need to gain an understanding of radio's digital transformation. Everyone in the radio industry now, and what the potentials are. Funny enough, we've already had a discussion about this morning with a potential client around how digital can add to your bottom line in radio. Based on our experience working with some of the country's top brands and innovative radio brands as well, we're going to be sharing some data-driven insights, and Anise has got some great slides on that to show you how you might be more ready than others, and maybe you might be more ready than you think to take the next step in your evolutionary journey. So in this webinar today, where we're going to be chatting about how prepared is the radio industry for digital, the issue of audience privacy in particular, very important, I think, on everybody's lips, not from only from a GDPR point of view, but also a POPI aspect, but also around the programmatic issue. And then the opportunity for real-time rich data in metrics. And Anise is going to be taking you through some of that as well. So we have the insights from our customers. We did a survey just recently. Us as a media do go back to our clients and find out how well we're doing and how well we're scoring on a lot of aspects. And one of the questions was, how capable is your company or radio station in adopting digital change? Now, I'm actually going to put this poll up for yourself just to have a look and vote on, if you wouldn't mind. It was the lowest scoring, was it not, Anise? The lowest scoring item in the entire survey, and not damningly low, but it did take us by surprise because there were a number of high scoring items, not least of which our ability to help the teams and hold their hands and take them forward. But it was quite interesting from the perspective of radio being as innovative as it is, generally speaking, being a little bit cautious and saying, actually, we're not ready. So the question is how prepared is radio?
I think that did surprise us, and it surprised us more in terms of we understood them to be more ready than they thought they were, or they think they are. And then I'll throw that stat up in a moment to just give you a sense of where that is. But I think it does come to this issue of change, and where are we in the change, and we're living in this data-driven age, and now we've got this global pandemic. So apparently there's three kinds of hairstyles at the moment, what I have, untouched by human hands for 9 months.
At least you've looked the same in every webinar. Mine changes by degrees.
Or a buzz cut, or a suspiciously well-crafted styling. I clearly fall into the first category. So I think, when we look up, and I think I just want to say, let's just understand where we are and what the opportunities are for radio. And I think radio is absolutely not just ready for change. They want to change, and the change is not so far away for them, actually, when you relate it in the proper context. So 2020, hey, what a year. And apparently next week, Trump either changes our lives all over again, or we start going back to allegedly some kind of normality. I guess we can all be anxious until then. But let's just kind of zoom all the way out to the Big Bang, as I like to say, 14 billion years ago. What are the three big events that have happened in our understanding of life as we know it? And I would premise one was when we crawled out of the sea onto the land. There's life. And then we've dominated the land for all of this time. And what 2020 did was it's pushed us off this cliff of land back into a digital ocean or digital sea. And we're not going back. Because we've been digitizing for the last 10 years. And we've been socializing at scale for the last 10 years. And billions of us have now learned how to behave in this way. And it's clearly resonant at a human level, right? Irrespective of income, age, education, culture, digital socialization is the lever that's moving the world right now. But we tend to lose sight of the fact that that's human beings, right? And the tool might have changed and the speed might be faster, but the values and the principles are pretty much the same drivers as they've always been. So we understand that change right now to have been led by the public social media. They're not really public social media entities. They're private, for-profit, pretty much competitors to our customers.
Yeah.
Organizations.
And we'll unpack that a little bit further as well, and a little later.
Really, the way we see that, and what we see is, well, what comes after that? What do we do with this socialized behavior we now all possess? And how do we open the aperture to that? Because Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube, all of these kind of current platforms are really like the landlines of the digital industry. They're the first iterations, they get scale. But really what happens after that is a deepening personalization, a deepening privacy, a deepening, I want to do what I want to do, and I want to own what I want to do, and I want to own my journey as an organization, an entity. So we think what comes after social are premium or private social networks that leverage the behavior that we all already have. So, if you take 2020 as the perfect example, what's happened over the last 10 years is the world's been inverted. It used to be that work was fast and life was slow. We went to work to get the resources, access to data, the computers, the fax machine, not fax machine, the copy machine, to copy my kid's textbook. But for the last few years, intuitively in our own lives, we know that's not where the action is, right? And what the pandemic allowed us to do is actually bring that behavior into work. I mean, we didn't just suddenly discover the joys of, and it may not be such a joy after 6 months of it, video calling, because we were calling our nieces and nephews on the other side of the world, or in another city, or our grandchildren, and video calling and FaceTiming and keeping in touch in our personal lives. We had the power of our social networks, our digital networks, our instant messaging in our personal lives. And then we came to work and we kind of had to leave that all behind and kind of live like animals, that all of the stuff had never been invented. Email is compliance now. It's not really a productive tool in coming together because it's too slow, it's too laggy, and most importantly, it's not real time enough.
And then what was the Microsoft Teams number that we've heard today? Active users daily?
That's an example, right? But that's because it's a more collaborative, more conversational, more chatty, and more real-time environment.
Yeah.
Because if it's important, I'm messaging you. I'm not emailing you. So I think we got the excuse to bring those habits into work, and suddenly we realized, well, there's a lot of things we can do now because we already know how to do this. So if we think about many of our industries and how quickly we've actually adapted to this digital transformation, it's because we were kind of prepped. Now, what's the premise in that? Well, that's where radio has always been. It's the first human social network around a technology. It's resonant at that human DNA level. We all trust it. It's a high trust medium, probably because of that voice on the other end. It's hard not to trust it. And as a result, radio finds itself in an interesting position. It's got the trust quotient. It's got the sense of community and belonging and participation already from its audience. So it's more ready than it realizes for going digital. And I think, the experiences of some of our clients.
That's the point that was very interesting. I'm going to bring up the next slide in terms of that, and also bring you the results of that poll that we just posted.
Yeah,
and the interesting thing was, this was the score. 6.83. Exactly. How capable?
As you said, not bad, but not where we thought it would be, given that they were already digital and they were doing things.
Exactly. So maybe there's a way to deconstruct what radio thinks digital transformation is, and I think they have thought in the past that digital is going social, which you mentioned earlier, and the result of our poll is almost identical. We say moderately capable. 66% of this audience on this webinar right now have stated, and thanks for voting if you did. How capable are you? How do you think your organization is in adopting digital change? 66% on a scale 5 to 7, moderately capable.
I think we're more capable than we give ourselves, because we've got the value system, we've got the resonance with our audiences. We already know how to behave digitally. I think we need to give ourselves a chance play with that. And going digital is not going social. It's not tweeting. It's not gramming. It's not Facebooking.
It's not using those digital tools.
Yeah, it's changing the conversation with your audience. Honestly, it's letting in that feedback loop at a greater aperture. That's because the whole point of this digital revolution is the social revolution, and that socialized behavior. So, it's our, strangely enough, the problem is inverted. Are we listening to our audience enough? Normally we're more worried about is our audience listening to us. And I think now that we have digital with an opportunity to flatten that feedback loop, they can talk to us as quickly and as fast and as broad spectrum as we can engage with them. What then is sort of radio's place in that? And I think that's the exciting thing that keeps us on the journey we're in, because we think radio, more than most media types, are ready for that and are natural to them to be able to leapfrog that. And then what it means is,
we've noticed anecdotally,
not going digital and trying to become something you're not. It's just better radio.
Yeah.
And then certainly with our customers, we can see that.
But then behind the scenes, we're not quite seeing that shift. So can all departments work together? And we've done it, I think, from a digital perspective because of Agile and Scrum. So yeah. What is it that gives that ability to change? What
mindset? So I think it's about mindset, and I think when we talk about, and we've seen this as well in the most evolving, rapidly iterating, resonant, successful users of these modern digital platforms, those customers who are operating at the margins for one reason or the other. And as a result, it's about something they don't have. They don't have the formality of a traditional radio management structure, or they don't have the resourcing of a typical skill set, or they don't have a traditional customer base from an advertiser perspective. But as a result of those things that they don't have, and the fact that they're coming to it with a mindset that says, well, no one told us we can't, they're actually discovering and finding some really interesting discoveries. Mm-hmm. So what we're seeing is it's not a lack of data. The audience out there will consume. Are we giving them a reason to engage with us? It's not about how much money you have. It's not about how many skills you have in traditional broadcast. It's just about your willingness to embrace the change and experiment. So I've come up with about 3 things, I think, that are quite practical, that we need to consider in sort of choreographing this change within the organization, within radio, because the current structures have taught us to be very siloed.
So these are your 3 how to get your A into G sort of things, yeah?
Yeah. So pretty much the 3 practical things we think you can do. And when I say practical, caveat, courage and trust required. This is not something you can put buzzwords to or lip service to, or and in much of this digital space, there's an authenticity and a deliberateness that you have to have. You can't pretend to be something you're not. Audiences will call you out, customers will call you out, and really you will soon discover and call your own people out.
Cool.
Because
so
there's nothing
let's
there.
Look at these then.
Yeah. So let's say, what's the first thing you can do? I think look within. As I just said, we already are digital native. There are younger people in your team that are definitely digital native. They grew up this way. They know no other way. The older people are too, by the way. And their experience and expertise of values and ethics and production quality and editorial and all that is all very relevant. So they're not marginalized in this, because that's what those value systems that digital is kind of lacking, that ability to professionally curate and manage an audience. So there's a good mashup there. So I think within your team, and I'd say this for any radio station anywhere on the planet, if you look within, you will find the seed pearl to be able to begin a journey of transformation within your own people, right? But it means looking at your people maybe in a different way. in digital, it is a collaborative process. It's a communal process. It's a real-time process, and that means, Moloko from accounts, what do you know? You're just in accounts, so we won't listen to you. So you don't know where these catalysts for great ideas come from. So you got to be open to that. And that's on us to allow that discourse and debate and conversation. So I think look within, find the seed catalysts and agents of change within your own organization and understand, well, what can we do with that? So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is look outside. Who in your supplier ecosystem equally is an effective catalyst for change? Who's prepared to provoke you into some discomfort zones? Because that's change, right? Not doing what you like doing and what you want to do and what's safe. It's doing the challenging stuff and the courageous stuff. And are they prepared to do it together? So do a bit of learning together, do a bit of failing together. So is there an advertiser out there who's going to say, come, let me understand this digital thing together with you? Is there a sales house? Is there a partner? Is there a brand? Is there a supplier who's happy to sort of go on that journey? Because co-creation of your change is absolutely important. And that's where often, we think we are on this change and we must control it and we must dictate it. And I think change is a lot more plastic and a lot more unpredictable. So trying to achieve that is probably that kind of control is kind of almost impossible.
So you don't need to know it all.
Focus, absolutely. Sorry, John.
Sorry, you don't need to know it all as an organization. You can find a partner who's sticking to the knitting on their side, and you can partner with that and drive yourself both forward.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the point, right? And that's why you got to look at your supply chain as less of a supply chain and more as partners. Are they on a common co-created journey with me of common relevance? Or are they just giving me this one thing and add nothing to me, really? Because I'm not able to depend on iteration. Then all of the iteration is on me, and I'm only seeing this one sliver of the problem. And digital and transformation is a convergence problem. How do we bring more perspective into this problem? Because it's going to bring all of our teams into it, right? And we're seeing that, particularly with the benefit of a real-time data exhaust. Marketing can see it, promotions can see it, sales can see it, programming can see it, and therefore all begin to adapt and choreograph together in the real time, because at the end of the day, we want team.
Yeah.
And we want one outcome, and that's to delight our audience and our stakeholders.
And I think that's already happening in certain instances with radio stations where a campaign has started and there are various stakeholders within the business that are looking to go, well, how well is it doing? It's not just the presenter on air. They do want the feedback, and they're probably at the coalface of it. But the promotions teams, they want to know how well it's doing. The sales department, they want to know so they can feed back to the clients. So all of this is happening already.
Well, the true test of that courage is, do you let the client into the loop? Hey, look at what's happening. Because they understand their customer better than you do. So they can look at that engagement data and go, oh, God, we know why that's happening. Let's change. Right?
Sure.
That's a bit of courage. But it's a collective journey, and we got to sort of encourage each other forward on that. So that's the second thing. I think you got to look at your ecosystem around you, and try and figure that out. And that includes, by the way, not just your formal sort of supply chain, but your informal supply chain, your creative pipeline.
Yeah.
Those guys who hang around in the studio, just wanting to help out. Those guys with the nose pressed up against the glass. The people who are passionate and want to be involved in what you're doing, maybe don't understand how, don't have access, but they have a dream of being in radio. Well, invite them in, because you'll be surprised at what happens there at the creative level and at the content level.
So it's looking within, looking without.
Looking without, right? And I think the third real sort of exam question when we're looking at change is, how do we adapt our internal culture and our structure to encourage change? Because at the end of the day, we're businesses, we're accountable to stakeholders. We measured on certain metrics. and KPIs or key results or whatever you call them internally. But does our structure encourage or allow change? Or do we only focus on the thing that we're being measured on, which might not be the future? It might be, very much the past. And are we agile and adaptive and responsive enough to create meaningful focus around change that works? Right. So how do we find consensus as an organization on this is good change, this is chaos? It's something that we preach quite heavily internally, that rapid iteration is not chaos, but iteration to a purpose, not change for change's sake. So there's not just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. There's a little bit of that too, but once you start going on the journey, it's got to be driven and informed by a collective team focus around good change and what that means, and dealing with the challenges that throws up, right? We don't know enough about this, or we don't have skills in this area, or we need help like that. And one of the things that we try to encourage here at Media and in building our Fabrik product is we'll take help from anybody. So we've had the benefit of people from the Netherlands and from Switzerland and the US all actually come and volunteer and spend time in our organization to help us to skill up and scale up to change. So, our Agile and Scrum culture was developed very much by a gentleman called Renzo Klammer, who came in to help us on that because we didn't know much about it. So you'll be surprised at what you can access when you open yourself up to that kind of journey. And that was it was literally on a volunteer basis. It certainly didn't cost us commercially what it could have cost us. So you got to be creative around change. So okay. I think those are the three things. Look at your people internally. There's more there than you realize. Look at your ecosystem around you. There's a lot more there than you realize. And then I think lastly, you got to have a strong conversation with your stakeholders on, are you actually allowing us to go forward and achieve the change and transformation you want? Or are you preaching it, but still measuring us on the old things?
Yeah.
Because that, the wrong incentives give you the wrong results. The wrong measures give you the wrong results. So how do you measure that change, and how do you be productive around that?
I think those are really good practical ways, and I think it's a good introduction to this entire webinar. And once again, I encourage people, if you've got some queries or questions, probably not at this point, but certainly going into the next part. So thank you, Anis, for that. I'm actually going to put up the second poll that we had, and I'm happy for everybody to quickly vote in the interim. As a radio station or brand, you consider your social media channels, including WhatsApp, as your own. And this leads us very nicely into what we talk about in audience privacy.
Whose world are we living in?
It's a bit of a minefield, and you and I have had so many discussions at the office around this, from Fortnite to what's happening with Apple to generally looking out into the field and across the ocean, and how programmatic is involved with audiences, particularly with radio. I think there's a big push from overseas companies to get South African stations to convert to a programmatic format in some ways. But I think, and you alluded to it earlier, and was the fact that it's people first, tech second. In an increasingly inauthentic world of bots, big data, and I know Tim Zunkel, who put it on one of his articles recently on, I think, Biz Community as well, was talking about WhatsApp, what's up with WhatsApp for radio stations, because it's all very well you've got people engaging with you, but what does that data actually mean? So you risk losing connection with your customers, your audience. You've got jaded individuals who are tired of maybe a chatbot responding to them. And I think, once again, what you alluded to earlier was the fact that what sets radio apart is trust, specifically. Absolutely. And sometimes it's delivered inauthentically and without personality in some instances. But you, like you say, we are attuned to the human voice, and we trust that from a radio station.
Absolutely, and I think as much as we've corporatized and commoditized and taken the soul out of a lot of radio, here we still are, and still thriving to a large degree, more so than I think people give us credit for. And certainly when you look at a collective emergency like COVID, every one of our radio stations thrived. I mean, double or triple the engagement they were getting before that, because we turned to platforms we trust. And then, that comes down to the next issue is we now have a duty of care as organizations around our service role in a digital world and what we do with data and the ethical use of it. Because if we do this the wrong way, we erode trust. So you can see the challenges that a platform like Facebook is now facing, where what little trust they might have had has now been completely eroded.
But has it? And I'm going to refer to the poll here because this is very interesting. So 20% of this audience, and everybody's on, as a brand, you consider your social media channels, including WhatsApp, as your own. And 20% have said yes, 40% have said no, and 40% have said they're unsure. And to me, that's
well, if you're not sure, let me tell you. You don't own your audience, you don't own your data, you don't own your revenue, and you don't own the algorithm. It's their business. And every time you engage through those platforms, you build their business. It's as simple as that. Now, that doesn't mean you don't use it.
Though, quickly, we're not anti-social media to promote.
So that's my point, right? It's not that you don't use them, right? It's how you use it, right? And it's also about, that's the edge now. That's where discovery and where you connect up with the broader world out there, right? So those are the meta platforms that kind of go over everybody in their daily lives. And we were able to sort of navigate and connect and join with each other. But let's not be unrealistic about it. You have 100,000 followers on Facebook, you want to run a marketing campaign, you're going to pay to do that. Because it's not your community, it's Facebook's. And then splinter that out, and you're doing that on every sort of dimension. But more importantly than that, they don't give you anywhere near the view of the data that you should be seeing and you want to see, to be able to drive and iterate and grow your own service to your audience, right? So I think that's the one thing. The second thing is, I think radio has never thought of themselves as a platform. So radio is a human platform. Now we've got digital infrastructure. We can mash that together, and we can be an incredibly powerful locomotive for engagement and change within society. Because the thing that, and look, we know this intuitively, right? Because 20 years ago, we're 25 years old now, and we've been pulling at this for these 2.5 decades. But 20 years ago, we said the collective use of radio, online, and mobile is a velocity engine that is second to none. And radio moved to web because it gave them the visual element. It gave them the thing that radio was lacking at the time, which was the visual. Okay? Yeah. Now, I sometimes fail to understand why, maybe we don't see this as clearly. The next step of that journey is to bolt on the socialized behavior for ourselves, right? Because we control our website. We can get all of the data from there. And then suddenly when we get to the socialized behavior, we're almost like tentative and hesitant. Like, we shouldn't do that.
Because radio in general, and maybe people agree or disagree, but radio in general was very agile to incorporate these various things that were supposed to take it out at the knees. So over a period of 2 decades, and certainly in the last 10 years, there has been such a massive tsunami of change, from Facebook to Twitter to incorporating websites to manage all these platforms. And yet here we are sitting going, you need another platform. We're saying maybe use those still to market yourself, but there is that private social network.
Yeah, but there's also that confidence issue, right? So if I had my own social environment where people can talk to me, will they really talk to me? Because, if I switch off the WhatsApp, will anybody talk to me? And and that pretty much comes down to how you manage that change, because what we found is the audience want to engage with you.
Yeah.
And what they want to do is engage with you as intimately and directly as possible. So when you do allow it, actually what we're seeing is your metrics of engagement are 200, 300, 400% greater in your own social space than on a public social space. And that goes for consumption of advertising content or call to action content. There is an education issue, though. You've got to train your audience. They're Pavlovian, right? You ring the bell, they respond. So you've got to be able to actually walk that digital journey with a degree of intent and train them to engage with you digitally the way you want them to do that. But we're very good at that. We do that all the time. But so it's about being a bit more confident and understanding the real opportunity, I think, that radio now has with digital, which perhaps in the last few years, with the noise of the hyperscale platforms and them sucking all the oxygen out of the relevancy conversation, we kind of feel we're too old, we're too staid, and we don't know digital, and therefore, but we know people.
I think it's because we were lied to. There's the element of, and I think it's funny having heard and spoken to a lot of people who've watched the Netflix documentary around the social dilemma, and I don't think people quite understand how much data is being sucked from your platform. We built these platforms up. Radio built a lot of Facebook across the world, not just necessarily in South Africa, where we were, trying to get 100,000 likes on a page. Then the station itself was boasting 1 million likes or followers, et cetera, and you've got to keep that in mind. But where do you stay compliant?
Are you saying radio is complicit in Facebook's crimes against humanity?
No, let's not open up that can of worms either.
Well, but let's just talk about it.
All these platforms.
If we're going to manage data just to be compliant, not because it's the right thing to do, well, you're not hiding to nothing, because the consumer is getting smarter about what's happening with their data. Two, the platform vendors understand that the only currency they have is trust. So they're shutting down the ability to track and harvest and follow you across the digital web or the digital ecosystems. Certainly that's happening with Apple. Certainly that's happening with Microsoft. I think you'll find Google will start to introduce a lot of that soon. And there's a reason why Facebook warned a couple of months ago that if platform vendors like Apple and Microsoft throw that privacy switch as their new systems are now building out, they'll lose 50% of their revenue from an advertising perspective. So when we look at this, we've got to say, how do we treat our customers' data? Are we being compliant? But also, are we doing the right thing? Because objectively, are we disconnected from our societies? Because that's where the trust comes from.
Yeah.
If we want to build a healthier community and a more sustainable society, and we know that certain platforms are toxic to that, then we now we've got to make a choice. Which side of history do you want to be on? Or is it just about money and the return?
Well, unfortunately,
and I think
that's where it is sitting.
The audience pushes us forward on that, because that education process that's happening with the audience means they will opt out of your engagement if they don't trust you. And that's not something we can ever afford to lose.
Somebody's just joined the conversation, Oliver Dipple, just saying social media has crossed over from a public service to being a publishing house. So they choose which information to promote.
Social media was never a public service.
Well,
Facebook.
And the expert partners who have the ability to influence these choices are hidden to the public. Now, I agree with him on the second part, because that's absolutely true. We were told to build these platforms up, and I think it's you that keeps talking to some of the station managers and saying, hey, it's expensive to get in touch with your audience on Facebook or Twitter.
It is, but let's just be clear about this. Those are public services. They're private for-profit enterprises, as I've said, right?
Yes.
They're now grappling with the fact that actually they have to have editorial curation. They have to have curation of trust and ethics and standards, because they affect the way people perceive reality. So now they're finding themselves in this awkward position of, actually, yes, we are a media entity, or a editorial entity, because we have to have an opinion, right? And you're seeing how badly they're kind of coming to it at the moment in the American election. They're letting certain things just slide, and then they're knee-jerk reacting to other things, and all that's happening is people still don't trust them at all, as a collective. So when we look at this, that issue, that data and ownership and curation of data created in the Facebooks and the WhatsApps and the Twitters and all of these guys, is going to be the exact same issue that radio is going to face when we have the data on our audience. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to use it? How are we going to share it? And how are we going to keep trust with our communities? And that's not about, I'm being compliant. At that point, you have to answer, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. And that's where, I guess, the fights start in the boardroom, because the right thing to do is not always the profitable thing to do. It might be the sustainable thing to do, but the boardroom doesn't think in the arc of 5 years. They think in the arc of this quarter. And I think that's where,
which is where Facebook finds itself too.
Sorry?
Which is where Facebook finds itself too, now that they are beholden to a board.
Now they've gone through the whole cycle, right? So now they're looking at this and realizing that their audience is fleeing them. You check in, but not because you trust it. You've gone onto other platforms, really, particularly amongst the young. So platforms like TikTok and all that have, and people will keep switching platforms until they perceive they find one that they trust or serves them or they believe is better than the other, right?
Yeah.
And that's an ever-moving shell game. That's a distraction to radio. Radio needs to engage directly with its audience, establish that relationship digitally as a first-party service with their audience, and answer the questions around how they will preserve, keep trust, and build a strong human community with their audience.
But then quickly, Anis, on the fact of programmatic, if it's no longer allowed, and you showed me on the new Safari browser, we went into several radio station websites, and then you click on a little icon, I think it's a shield on the top by the toolbar, and it tells you how many trackers are on that particular website. I was astounded. The one had 15 trackers on a very big commercial radio website. It varies from one station to the next, but what if programmatic is no longer allowed? What does that mean?
You need to establish a relationship with your audience and convince them that they need to participate and receive the engagement you want to give them. They need to opt in.
Okay.
And that's actually no different to what Poppy is going to ask you to do, or the Consumer Protection Act, or the GDPR, or any number of regulatory environments. The EU is already answering some of these questions around data privacy and data structure. Some of it is going to be imposed on us by, as I said, the platform vendors, right? And it's not an abstraction. We can't say it's too complex, it's too technical. Let's just keep on going the way we're going. We've got to have a longer term view of it than that.
Okay.
Because we're putting in roots into the ground now to be able to differentiate ourselves from the guy next door. And that's going to become, am I relevant? Am I real time? Can I be trusted?
Okay. So that brings us on to a very interesting point, and we try to broach it with a couple of guests over the last while. It's a subject for our poll as well, which I'm going to put up now. It's around the BRC RAMS data. So let's just talk about the absence of RAMS in radio for the last while. And anecdotally, we've touched on a couple of our own clients and also some of our clients who aren't in field, so to speak. And they have said that certain radio stations that did very, very well in the last RAMS diary continue to run with those figures because that was the last ones they had. They were meaningful back then. But if you lost 300,000 listeners in the last RAMS, you're going to be out in market saying, well, we've done a whole load of strategic changes and you are itching for change. So it brings us to the question about our real-time metrics. So if in the absence of new BRC RAMS data, what do you do?
Well, look, I think we all can be sympathetic to the challenges of what the industry is grappling with in terms of benchmarks and measurements, and digital's been disrupting that. Okay, and then part of that is, I think the stations need to say, well, I was never able to measure my own audience before in a comprehensive way, but with digital, I actually can, and that's part of a muscle that we've got to learn to exercise, because we've got to tell our own stories from the data that we can see from our own audience. And I think there's a place and a role for a industry-wide neutral benchmark. And no doubt that needs to be iterated and modernized. Perhaps, it's too slow or infrequent at the moment. And certainly something like COVID doesn't help, right? Sure. But that's no excuse for us not telling our story from the data that we do have now. The biggest sort of opportunity dividend for radio is the fact that radio used to be analog, now can be digital, and therefore has data. And understanding our audience and folding that into our daily programming, our daily tactics, our daily strategy, and our storytelling to our stakeholders is this big new muscle that we need to learn to exercise. Not difficult. I mean, it's interesting from some of the examples we've seen in our current clients, where one, the democratization of data and data at a sort of anonymized and meaningful level still allows, as I said, a programming team to look at that data at the same time as a marketing team is looking at it, at the same time as a leadership team is looking at it, and all begin to collaborate and co-create what can be done with this content. I mean, a very clear example for me, and I think we've got a slide on this, sure, is, one of our stations can start to see a very clear spike on a Thursday. And when you look at it,
I'll zoom into that one.
It sits up head and shoulders above the normalized sort of engagement. And we can now kind of drill into that and go, well, what's happening there? Why is the audience doing that? We're suddenly getting 200%, 300%, 400% engagement in this particular time zone. And that's related to content, right? Because that's what our audience is consuming from us. What are we doing? Well, it turns out that it's a relationship program. It's a talk show about relationships. But that's not an question for us on, well, yeah, but why would the streaming jump up so much? Right? Because, yeah, streaming is a proxy for FM. If I'm turning on the stream, there's a lot more possibly turning on the dial. But I don't know that you get dials anymore, but you know what I mean.
On the scanner.
On the scanner. But why would they be doing this? And particularly at a time when this audience is not at work, typically don't have access to data. So this is a conscious choice they're making to consume this content and to consume it on mobile. And I think it builds on some of the learnings that James Cridlin shared with us a couple of months ago around contextual engagement, right? The way I engage on a laptop is different to the way I engage on a speaker, is different to the way I engage on headphones.
Headphones, yeah.
And when we sort of double tapped into this and went deeper, we began to understand that this was the kind of content that people want to consume privately, not necessarily communally. That they wanted that feedback loop to engage and ask questions directly with the station, and that sense of intimacy with being able to say, I'm talking to the studio team and like nobody else, is really, really powerful. And we're able to start to look at this from the data exhaust and go, this is a very real, very practical, very on or relevant insight that we are now able to engage in ourselves. How do we build on this? How do we shape this? How do we capture the momentum of the moment? What do we learn from this, right? And this is not happening at some theoretical level with the research team or the post-campaign analysis or programming looking at this a quarter later. They're looking at it as it's being broadcast. Why is this happening? So that value of the real-time,
you can see that the audience are engaged, and you can start making some programming decisions around that. So, absolutely. So just the results of the poll in the absence of new BRC RAMs data, and I've got a question as well that's just come through. So thanks very much for popping that in the chat. So it's a 50-50 split on we are using web and social media numbers and dashboards in the absence of RAMs or diaries, and we've commissioned some independent research, literally a split 50-50.
Absolutely,
which is interesting.
It is, and I think just to reinforce that, Anne-Marie's comment on using the digital data that they do have to start planning their own navigation and journey, I think just reinforces the point we're making. So yes, there may be challenges in the broader market around data and audience measurement and research, but I don't think that we should see ourselves as victims of circumstance. We are able to be a bit more aggressive and be a bit more confident in our storytelling around the data that we are seeing and that we do have.
And then you're not flying blind.
Sorry? And
then you're not flying blind.
No, absolutely, you're not flying blind. Look, but that's the digital transformation, right? Because it makes reality a lot more accountable. So, the point is, this is an example of a team doing something useful. Equally, you get the negative result, right? The guy we thought is popular is getting no bloody engagement. But the guy who's actually getting the engagement is the guy on the Tuesday when we thought the Monday guy was the winner, right? And that becomes a different conversation. It's like, look, you're not resonating. So you either need to change it up, or we're going to be adaptive and we're going to start putting some spin on the Tuesday guy. And don't get your nose out of joint. It's not that you're irrelevant. It's just that's where the audience is, and that's where we are at the moment.
So have you seen that in other versions where people have actually started making programming decisions based on numbers like this?
Most of our clients are starting to make programming decisions based on the data they've seen from the platform.
Okay.
And talent decisions as well.
Interesting. I'm going to bring up the next slide here as we delve into the fact that a lot of radio stations, and I think the regulation around platform companies has changed. We want to just touch on briefly around the fact that advertising is in trouble. We've had various webinars on this since the beginning of COVID, where it fell off a cliff, obviously. I think there's a lot of clawback. There's been a lot of innovative programs and initiatives taken by certain radio stations across the world that we've seen to try and claw some of that back. So my question is, long-lived subscriptions and maybe donations with your own platform? I mean, publishers, particularly like the New York, Washington Post, the New York Times, the Telegraph in the UK, they're starting to make up the difference from a platform that was dead as a physical format, as we well knew it, now has begun on to make huge earnings in terms of donations and subscriptions. Could it be done with radio?
Look, I think that boils down to, are you producing the content that people are prepared to pay for? I think it can be done with radio. I think it can be done with services that are appropriate to that audience. So it is still a form of annuity or subscription revenue, but it may not be a pay for content point of view. And I think it's something that is going to be different to different radio stations. I can understand at the level of the diaspora. I want to be in touch with the home, and I'm homesick, and I'm prepared to pay a small subscription to be connected to a kind of content and storytelling on a regular basis. But that's not really a subscription necessarily. It's more, I want to support this content because I value it, right? And I think that's part of that courage test, right? Do our audience actually believe our content is relevant, and are they prepared to support it in different ways? So I think there's possibilities there. I don't want to go too deep into that because I think it's very dependent on the context of the broadcaster, the radio station, the kinds of things they're doing. But as a digital platform, the opportunity is there to create revenue from the wiring of services to that audience on behalf of a number of stakeholders, advertising, NGOs, businesses, that people begin to value, and then they begin to support you on. right? If you're interested in that, give us a shot, and I think we can probably go deeper into that.
Sure.
I think where we see radio today, and that's the kind of slide, and maybe we can close on this and maybe grab a few more questions, is, this is our sort of very creative way of trying to visualize the radio's sort of positioning in the landscape right now, where we have our broadcast signal, whether that's FM or DAB or whatever that is, and then we've got the social edge around us, and then we've got the two assets really that we own directly, and that's the website and our app service point. And then how do we need to think of our broadcast with these sort of four elements? And that graphic kind of is our attempt to kind of illustrate it, that we don't not use any of these things, but how we use them change in relation to each other and in relation to where we are on the event timeline in terms of the content we're promoting. So the FM signal or the broadcast and your app are your two real-time levers. Those are only two real-time things that you control, okay? Social media and your website are contextual. People consume it in a particular context at a particular time in a particular way, right? And I'm not going to break into what you're doing right now through my website. I can do that via a notification on your app. Hey, come on in, something exciting is happening. I can call to action on air. Hey, tell your friends, in 10 minutes, something's happening. So we've got these two now very powerful levers, the on-air broadcast matched with this mobile companion that we can illuminate and flick a switch on and call to action as powerfully as we do on air. And the way we then use the social edge and our website have got to support those two real-time call to actions. So we'll do a lot of promotion and explanation on the website. We'll do a lot of focusing of a lens onto our web and our app platforms via the social edge. But the idea is you want to kind of flow your audience across the spectrum of context and real-timeness. And increasingly, as you get to the point where you're doing that interview, you're doing that live event, the two levers you primarily are operating are the real-time levers that you control, while the story is conveyed and preserved on your website and conveyed via social media out there into the world and into discovery. So learning how to program for this, I think, is quite an important shift change, because we tend to think in programming terms of only the radio clock, not the converged digital clock now, and this multi-spectrum space, because it might mean that we're using the website in the week of the pre-promo and social in the week of the pre-promo in a particular way, and then the app takes precedence and the broadcast takes precedence in the week of the event, and then the role of web and social change during that time. But this is why we think this is such an exciting space, right? Because
James Cridland did mention something which I'm going to bring in here, was the fact that he said maybe more of these things in radio need to be pre-recorded, because you can then choreograph everything in the background. That's the broadcast. Absolutely. You know what's going to happen at which markers, right down to the time. So these things should happen from a digital point of view, which I think was quite interesting.
It is, and that's why I say that's the wonderful playground that radio is now. We have all of the assets of digital, with all of the understanding and knowledge of the human space.